Hello, everybody. This is Mark Blanton from the Real South Africa.
And I am Latasha Blanton, also with the Real South Africa.
And you guys are welcome to sunny South Africa. If this is your first time, this is your opportunity to come with Phil Scott with his channel.
And they will be here on March 16th through the 25th, 2022. The cost does include the flight, most meals, and your domestic flight in country from Johannesburg to Cape Town. The cost is $5,500 per person sharing and $6,150 per person wanting a single room.
Now, at this point, you don't need any extra shots. The only thing you need to do is have a negative COVID test prior to you leaving. And then, of course, upon departure, we will get you another COVID test. And then that's it. So that's really all you need. And, of course, a passport.
So no shots, no vaccines, no nothing. Just get to South Africa. We'll see you here.
The Euro crisis, double depreciations, Occupy protests, and Libya corruption scandals aside, it seems that capitalism is alive and well, at least in Africa. Africa is rising. Westerners are often told these days, after decades of economic ruin, civil war, and governmental mismanagement. Impressive economic growth statistics, the burgeoning African middle class, mushrooming mobile phones, and internet use. These things are all proudly trumpeted, reminding the world of the capitalist way. But why all this good news now? The seemingly obvious answer is that things are indeed improving in Africa, and the Western media now quite simply reporting what is happening. But to properly understand the African rising narrative, we also need to take a look at what their response to the much older dark continent narratives that have dominated Western discourses on Africa for centuries. Tellingly, we can trace these negative narratives at the beginning of Western civilization itself. In histories, Herodotus, aka the father of history, relates to a cautionary tale about what happened in Africa. 5 Nasomanians were off exploring southern Libya. After several days of wandering, they found some fruit trees and started helping themselves. Then several men of small stature, all of them skilled in magic, seized and captured them, taking them for inscrutable and desultory magic dwarf purposes. This was the start. This is where it all began. In this way, Herodotus suggested that Africa was not only different, but also more threatening, sinister, and dangerous than Greece. Subsequently, generations of European writers followed suit, substituting fantasy for fact in markedly antagonistic ways. Europeans created an image of Africa that was the perverse opposite of Europe's. Europe's general spirituality would, by comparison with, in contrast to their image, be self-evident. Europe's own idea to itself was thus predicated on its image of Africa and other so-called backward regions. From the 17th century onwards, debates over the slave trade, racism, and colonialism helped crystallize these narratives that are negative in Western discourses. Abolitionists urged that Africa was a place of suffering because the slave trade provoked war, diseases, famine, and poverty. Anti-abolitionists said Africa was so forbidding as making slavery in foreign countries positive escape. Either way, Africa was full of savagery and constant wars. The growing discourses on race added further dimensions to the debates, supposedly explaining African backwardness and the savagery as biologically predetermined characteristics. Social duantists such as Herbert Spencer and Gwyneth such as Francis Galton exerted enormous influence and lent credibility to generalized xenophobia. Colonialism went even further because of what they thought they knew about Africa a land of fantastical beasts and cannibals, slaves, backward races, and so on. The colonial powers managed to convince themselves that they were subjugating Africans and others for their own good. European violence was going to stop the war endemic to Africa, and they are enlightened over. Rule would be to the benefit of all via Livingstone's idea of Christianity, civilization, and commerce, the CCCs or 3 Cs. Now the independence era of the late 1950s and 1960s saw most positive stories about Africa enter Western discourses. The archives of British Panth contain several clips of the Queen visiting former colonies, which this supposedly evidencing a bright future for countries like Sierra Leone, Uganda, and Ghana, independently. But coverage of the Nigerian Civil War began a trend in Western reporting that has lasted to the present. The UK tabloid The Sun called the secessionist Biafra the land of no hope, accompanying the peace with photos of the starving and the dead. It is not hard to trace a fairly straight line connecting headlines like this and contemporary reporting that trots out cliches about the heart of darkness. But now, Africa is not only an emerging market, it is an emerging continent again. But why? It is partly because some people think the best way to repudiate the negative stereotypes of Africa is to pump out wholly good news. An account on Twitter called African Good News is a case in point. It handles tweets links to positive reportage of Africa, such as Angola may produce 1 million eggs a day, and doing business in Africa in fast-growing Africa, the European edition. It is one facet of a large rebranding project, which some observers may approve, seeing them as a necessary corrective to the boilerplate journalism mentioned above. Others are already finding them clinched and boring or downright misleading, a facile PR exercise designed to encourage mainly Western investors. See the latest issue of Money Week if you want to be bombarded with statistics and given some idea about where to put your dollars, pounds, or euros. That there are reasons between some of the writing and the 19th century imperialistic propaganda may be because of concern. It is important to stress that however you assess the Africa rising narrative relative worth, it should not be discounted because some of the statistics may be unreliable. We are seeing more and more African rising narratives because it is. And the changes are not confined to economic growth. Large-scale political violence and war has also declined sharply over the past decades. For example, things indeed are changing on the ground. Nonetheless, it is demand for the stuff underneath it. Africa's mineral and oil wealth that is depriving the economic growth behind all these narratives. The BRIC economic and China in particular have fueled the commodities boom that has benefited the state coffers across the continent through questions, though questions remain over the actual extent and the equities of this boom. But perhaps the central reason we're also seeing all this good news in Western media links back to the West's own idea of itself and of Africa. Africans are now, finally, playing by the Western's rule. The supposedly redemptive power of capitalism coupled with the increasing adoption of liberal democracy in Africa vindicating the Western way. Moreover, feelings of decline in the Western stubbornly low economic growth, the threat of social upheaval, the rise of China, and so on have made all these African rising narratives all the more breathless. The economists, Money Week, and the rest seem to see in Africa's rise hope for the West's recovery. Is Africa rising then? Because the West needs it too. Africa is the continent of extremes, according to well-informed sources. the continent of extreme, the continent that has it all. In the West, Africa is portrayed either as the heart of darkness, with Africans suffering from quartet of diseases, poverty, famine, and war, or as rising phoenix, like the living and vibrant repudiation of all warring signs of perhaps capitalism, as it currently conducted, may not suit our increasingly globalized world. The monogenic quality of these narratives is difficult to escape. The good trio of liberalism, democracy, and capitalism seems to be taking hold in Africa, but only if the West can help Africa defeat the bad trio and traditionalism, authoritarianism, and the poor microeconomic policies. These reductive binary oppositions are signs of overly simplistic thinking, infantilizing not only Africans but also the Westerners who read about them. So in response to these crude generalizations, there has been a growing chorus of voices calling for better reporting of Africa. More nuanced, contextualized, and balanced reporting is not something anyone would disagree, but this should not just apply to negative stories. Uncontextualized, simplified, and wholly positive stories will only lead to further misleading. Africa must and can only be understood on its own terms. Initiatives like Uganda Speaks and Global Voices and the BBC's recruiting of African reporters, the CNN altogether, are a good start. The more Westerners learn about Africa from Africans, the better. But if they remain in the minority, we will end up having another single story of Africa that is almost as misleading and distorted as the ones we had before. Hey, what do you think about this? My name is Osie The Born Child. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe. I'll be seeing you in another video. Until next time, love you all. Bye-bye.
Living in America as a black person, you recognize there is one set of laws for you and one set of laws for those, especially in the white community. In our book, Passive Aggressive Racism in the System of White Supremacy, I take you through times in my life when I first started noticing white supremacy. We teach you how to recognize it, identify it, and also counter it in our book. This book is a beginner's course for those that are just starting to wake up and open their eyes to see the system of white supremacy. As a black American person, you must understand this system, because this system is life or death to you. How you handle it, how you deal with it, it can affect your mental health if you don't understand this system. Pick up our book, Passive Aggressive Racism in the System of White Supremacy, today on Amazon.